Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 138 of 2 Minute Talk Tips, the podcast that opens with a practical public speaking tip in the first 2 minutes before getting into a deeper discussion about public speaking. Today's tip comes to us from special guest Grant Baldwin.
I think one thing that you could do is tell stories. Like, stories are one of the most powerful tools that any speaker has in their arsenal. Tell as many stories as possible. So if I were to say this right now, I said, oh, okay, let me tell you a story. Like, everyone immediately perks up and I have their attention. Why? Because you have no idea where this is going, but it's a story, so you're going to hang on. So it could be sad, it could be inspiring, it could be depressing, could be funny, could be entertaining, could be boring. You have no idea where the story is going, but people are drawn to stories. Stories are memorable, they're relatable, they are personable. So tell stories. I recommend that you tell first-person stories that you've actually lived, that you've experienced. Like, there's nothing wrong with saying, let me tell you about Netflix and Blockbuster. You can tell those stories, but you can also say, let me tell you about the story that happened to me, a couple of years ago, or let me tell you the story that happened to me as a kid, or whatever it may be. Like, those are relatable, memorable stories that audiences are drawn to. So one of the best tips I can give you for a speaker is to tell stories and tell a lot of them.
Stick around, and after the break, we'll hear more from Grant Baldwin. Welcome back. I'm speaking with Grant Baldwin today, and I am thrilled. I've been a fan for a while. Grant has built a business speaking to speakers about the business of speaking. And that was one of those sentences I tried to make as long as possible with as few words as possible. He hosts the Speaker Lab podcast, which is on my weekly must-listen-to list. His Speaker Lab company runs the popular Booked and Paid to Speak program. And now he has a new book coming out next week on February 18th, 2020, called The Successful Speaker: 5 Steps to Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, and Building Your Platform. If you've ever wondered how keynote and other professional speakers make their living, and more importantly, how you can too from the stage, Grant is the guy to listen to. So let's get started. So Grant, thanks so much for joining us here on 2 Minute Talk Tips this week.
Bill, thanks for letting me hang out with you, man. I appreciate it.
That's awesome. I'm a big fan and thrilled we can make this happen here. I guess to get started here, I'd like to start with understanding what is sort of your earliest memory of speaking in public or speaking and performing in front of a group of people.
Yeah, so if we go way back in time, in high school, I was really involved in my local church. My youth pastor had a really big impact in my life, and so I remember just like really resonating with that. Like, I want to do that. And so in high school, like, I remember taking like a your normal speech class and gave a couple of talks in my high school classroom, and then taught like a Sunday school class here or there at church, and it just really resonated with me. Like, it really clicked with me. I was like, I want to do more of that. So in fact, in college, I worked for a guy who was a full-time speaker, and I got to kind of see behind the scenes, helped him with his like travel and contracts and logistics, and helping him book some gigs, and so just kind of got to see like this is a thing. Like, I think for a lot of people, you don't necessarily realize that being a speaker is like an actual thing. And so seeing it behind the scenes on that, and then seeing my youth pastor speak and the work he was doing, like, it all just really clicked with me. And so that's kind of the path I was on. So after college, I actually worked at a local church speaking as a youth pastor, and had a lot of opportunities. And I ultimately decided, like, I really want to do more speaking. And so then I started just messaging as many other speakers as I could find, just try to figure out, like, how do I become a speaker? What's the ins and outs of this world? And slowly built up a speaking business from there.
What I think a lot of folks who especially have not been a part of quote unquote church world don't realize is just how formative a lot of those earlier church and faith experiences are in getting people their initial speaking opportunities, their initial speaking practice, their initial stage time.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is like the way you become a better speaker is that you speak, and I think for some people it can be difficult to feel like, well, it's hard for me to become a better speaker or to improve if I don't have many at bats, and in the world that I'm in, I don't feel like I have many at bats. And so, certainly in the church world, as a youth pastor, I was speaking every single week, and I always had to come up with a new talk. And so it was good in that sense. It gave me a lot of at bats and opportunities to work on my craft and to get better as a speaker and to work on developing presentations. And so, it's certainly there are no shortage of opportunities in the in the church world to speak.
Cutting your teeth in that space, did that obviously provides a lot of great then practice, not only getting up on stage, but taking the time to think about what your message is, craft your message, hone it, practice it, and then deliver it in a very short time frame. Did that also lead to any bad habits you had to unlearn as your career progressed?
Yeah, that's a great question. Nothing that comes to mind. I'm sure there might be some in there. It's definitely like one of the pro and cons with it is that it does give you a lot of reps. It does give you a lot of at bats. The challenge with it though is for most professional speakers, they're speaking to a different audience all the time. And so you're usually doing like one or two different talks, and you're doing them every time. And so each time you give that talk, the talk gets better. Whereas in the church world, let's say that I speak and I tell a great story, my favorite story to tell. Well, it's kind of burned that story. It's gone, meaning that it's going to be the same audience next week. And so I can't use that. I can't keep using that story over and over and over again. We've heard that story. You got to tell us a different story. So in one way, like it's a bummer that you can't keep using and refining material. Like, I told that story, but I feel like I could have told it better. Well, you told it. Cat's out of the bag. You can't use that for a while. Versus like, I guess the upside of that though is that it does force you to come up with new material on a regular basis. Versus like, all right, I got my one talk and I just stick with that. So it does force you to, on a regular basis, every single week, you're coming up with something new. And so it really forces you to think through like other stories that you haven't told, or different ways of giving a point or giving an example. So there's certainly some upside with it too.
One of my favorite things about when I speak to a new crowd, a group of folks I haven't trained before or whatever, is that, and I actually just tell them, great, I can use the same jokes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like we were saying, each time you tell that joke, it gets better because you get the real-time feedback from the audience. You get the timing down better, all those things that you just get to practice on in front of a new audience. And ultimately, then whenever you are telling the joke again, then hopefully you have had that practice on those reps that make it better each time.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a bunch of friends who were doing stand-up comedy for a while, and the amount of time they spent obsessing over a particular word in a particular sentence to maximize the laugh it's really a stunning level of construction that most folks don't think about.
No, absolutely. I think that's a misconception about speaking, and not only just speaking in general, but like the best speakers on the planet. They don't just like stand up there and maybe scribble some thoughts on a napkin and hop up there and make it up as they go, and hopefully it all magically works out. Like, it just doesn't work like that. Like, they have spent hours and hours and hours like thinking through, like you said, the way that they're going to tell a story, and the way that they're going to craft something, and the way that they're going to take a 12-word sentence and try to get it down to 8 words just to make it tighter and more concise, or going back and forth. Does it make more sense to use this word versus that word? This word has it sounds better, or it's an alliteration, or it's just a funnier word, or it's a more powerful, impactful word. And so, yeah, all those nuances, like all those things matter. But it also just, you can do it, but it takes work to get to that level and to really think it through and truly view speaking as that craft.
Yeah, absolutely. So, while, a speaker is doing this work, is doing this crafting, is doing this refinement, how do you balance that with the need to appear somewhat spontaneous and come across well and actually be authentic, as opposed to sort of a manufactured perspective?
Yeah, so I think the more you know your material, the more comfortable and confident you are in your material, the more it gives you a lot of the freedom and the almost like the latitude to be spontaneous, because you can be more present in the moment. So I think one of the things we teach is, whenever you're working on your presentation or your talk, is you're not trying to memorize it verbatim. It's not like you're trying to memorize a word for word manuscript. So, if you and I were watching let's say a sporting event, they sing the national anthem and someone butchers the lyrics, like the whole place knows that they butchered the lyrics, because you know what the lyrics are supposed to be. versus like if you're telling, if you tell a story or if you're giving your talk and you forget part of it or you leave part of it out or you do the points out of order, like nobody knows the difference. Nobody's following along in the audience going, oh, wait, go back, you skipped a word there. Like nobody knows. So it should take some of the pressure off of you of feeling like I need to just regurgitate this. So I think it's really important to note that as speakers, like you are a human talking to a collection of other humans. And so the more human that you are, the easier it is to connect with and relate to versus, some speakers are so robotic and they're so deep in their own head of, okay, I'm going to say this line and now I'm going to take 5 steps this way. And then I move my hand like this. And then I say that. And it's just like, like that's not how you act in real life. Now, again, it's worth like thinking some of those pieces through. But again, if the whole thing is just like manufactured and scripted, I think it can really come across fake. And so I think that's where, again, knowing your material, knowing where you're going also gives you, again, kind of the freedom to be spontaneous when things come up or when something happens. If a cell phone goes off in the room or, there's a fire alarm or someone sneezes funny or something happens, then you can respond to it. You can react with it. You can go with it. And not feel like, oh, dang, I can't do that because it throws me off script or I'll lose my place. Again, you are a human responding in a human way, which is what the audience will relate to and connect with.
And it's kind of like by having that plan ahead of time, it's like I know if I'm driving from Boston to Seattle, it's a lot easier when I have that plan ahead of time to know that, hey, I can swing by and stop off at Wall Drug in South Dakota.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And you have that freedom to be able to do that. But you don't necessarily know that you're planning on stopping at Wall Drug until maybe you see the 48 million billboards. And you're like, hey, here, let's take this detour. So it's kind of like you're in the thick of the trip. You're in the middle of the talk. And then something happens that you decide to, hey, this is something that seems to be really resonating with the audience. So I'm going to dig into this a little bit deeper versus, maybe you're talking and here's I told a joke and they didn't laugh at all and they didn't think it was funny. And so I'm already thinking ahead in my mind, like, okay, if they didn't laugh at that, then the story I'm going to tell or the joke I'm going to tell in 30 minutes, they're definitely not going to laugh at. So I'm going to go ahead and mentally cut that and take that detour out. So you're kind of making some of those adjustments on the fly based on, what's actually happening live with the audience.
Right. And I think you made the really important point there where your audience doesn't necessarily know if you've left out a word or you left out a sentence or swapped the order of stories. I mean, even in the Manager Tools podcast, they talk a lot about how when people screw up in job interviews, it's not because they made a mistake. It's because they made a mistake and then they obsessed over that mistake and that poisoned the rest of their performance.
Yeah. It's easy to overthink things and overanalyze things. One way to think about this is remember that the audience takes their cue from you, meaning that whenever you are standing on stage, you are the thermostat for the room. You set the temperature for the room. So whatever happens, the audience takes their cues from you and they react based on how you react. And I'll give you an example. So let's say that you are up there as a speaker and all of a sudden you forget what you're going to say, right? You lose your place, you kind of get fumbled, and all of a sudden you have a choice. You can be super anxious or nervous or uncomfortable or just make it really, really, really awkward. And the audience will feel that. They feel the awkwardness and the heaviness of that moment. Or you can decide, you know what, it happened. I lost my place and blow it off like it's no big deal. And you can keep moving on because if it's not a big deal to you, it's not a big deal to them. I was speaking literally just a couple of weeks ago at an event, and we were doing some Q&A at the end, and that happened to me. I just totally lost my train of thought, and I don't know what we were talking about or where we were going. And again, I have a moment there of just like, I can panic and freak out and be awkward and get super nervous and uncomfortable, or it can be like, guys, I got to be honest, I don't remember what in the world we were talking about there. What was the question or what were we talking about? Everybody laughs. It's not a big deal because it wasn't a big deal to me. So therefore it's not a big deal to them. So remember, again, that the audience takes their cues from you.
Right. Q&A is one of those interesting things. Half the time somebody will ask a question, I'll go ahead and answer it, I think, and then just end up wrapping up with, did I actually answer the question there?
Right. So, or whenever Q&A happens, sometimes people, they don't they know in their mind what their question is, but they have a hard time, going from their mind to their mouth, basically. And so they're just kind of rambling on, or here, I need to tell you my whole life story to get to the question. And so, one of the things you can do is sometimes just help people in those situations, and even ask them, so let me make sure I understand your question, or just interrupting them and asking them, so what's your question there? And help them again, you're not trying to be rude or embarrass them, but you're trying to just help them get to what's the point or where they're going.
Right. Especially if they don't speak a whole lot, they're suddenly in a microphone in front of all these people, and they don't have the practice in asking that question, in crafting their message at that moment. And so they struggle. And it's a mercy sometimes for the speaker to actually go ahead and cut that off or refine that or restate their question. It's favoritism.
Yeah. So you're exactly right that a lot of times when someone is doing a Q&A that they may be nervous, they may be uncomfortable, they may not be used to that environment. They may in their mind be like, oh, I have a really good question. And then all of a sudden they stand up, everyone's looking at them, they're holding a microphone, they have the attention. All of a sudden they can kind of clam up or lose their own train of thought. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities to, help an audience member in that situation.
So you've been talking about how you help folks and how you teach folks. And so what is the Speaker Lab?
Yeah, so the Speaker Lab is a training company that helps people understand how to find and book paid speaking engagements. So we have found that there's a lot of people who were like me whenever I got started, in that I felt like I had the potential, but I needed the plan. I had the potential, but I needed the plan. I like speaking. I want to do more speaking. I had some speaking experience. I felt like I was a decent speaker. No idea, though, how do you actually find and book gigs? And so I was a full-time speaker for many, many years. I was doing 60, 70 gigs a year. I've done hundreds and hundreds of events and paid events and thousands of presentations, and worked with so many different clients. And so we just had a lot of people who were asking us, saying, hey, I want to be a speaker too. How do I do that? And some that would want to do it full-time. They want to speak, again, 50, 60, 70, 100 times a year. And some that would say, I don't want to do that much, but I wouldn't mind doing, 2 or 3 or 4 gigs. I just don't know, how do you find those, and how do you book those, and who hires speakers, and how much do you charge, and should you speak for free, and all the ins and outs of that world. And so that's the core basically then of what we got into, was teaching people that side of it, teaching people who, again, were where I was when I got started, saying, I want to be a speaker. I don't know what to do next. And so that's the core of what we teach inside our programs at the Speaker Lab.
I mean, there's clearly a need there. It's one of those things where you see a lot of speakers, and if you're outside the world, it's just these people who just, maybe they've written books, maybe they got hired someplace, but there's not, like, you may not have realized there was a place you could go ahead and learn this. And before you started this, there really wasn't a place someone could go ahead and learn this profession and how to actually go ahead and execute the operation side of the job, because nobody thinks about the operation side of most jobs unless it's specifically an ops.
No, absolutely. And so there's 2 sides of the equation. There's the artist side and then the entrepreneur side. So if you're someone who says, like, hey, I am really, really passionate about speaking, and I love speaking, and I love the talk, and I love interacting with the audience, and I love creating and delivering the talk, and I love the art side of it and the performance side of it, that's great. But there's also the business side of it. If you don't know how to find and book gigs, you're not going to be able to be in business, and you're not going to be able to share your message with other people. You're not going to be able to help others. And so you have to be able to have both sides of it. So kind of reminds me, in the book E-Myth by Michael Gerber, he talks about, imagine someone who's really, really good at baking pies. And so there's a different skill set in being able to make pies and bake pies really, really well, and also being able to run a bakery. Like, those are 2 different things. But if you know how to make pies and you're the world's greatest pie maker, but nobody knows you exist, you're out of business. And so you have to be able to wear both hats. And so that's a key thing that we want to be able to show people is, yes, it's important that you're a great speaker. Yes, it's important that you put together great content you can deliver from stage. But if you don't know what to do from there, then you just exist in a vacuum, and nobody knows you exist, and nobody knows how to hire you. Not to mention those who say, okay, I feel like I'm decent at booking the gigs, but I don't know what to do from here. So if someone were to hire you right now for a gig in 6 months, would you know what to send them? What do they need? What questions to ask? If you're trying to negotiate speaking fees, you don't even know how much you should be charging. So all the just nuances and ins and outs of that world. On the business side of how do you find and book gigs, and how do you run a speaking business, that's the core of what we get into.
Awesome, because those are 2 very different skill sets. I think many folks who are working the day job, working in their organization, have encountered somebody who was a stellar coworker, a great individual performer, and so because they were so good at their job, they got promoted to management, and then it all fell apart because it's a completely different set of skills. And being at one doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at the other unless you go ahead and get that additional training, learning, and education.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of speaker friends I know that are amazing on stage. They are phenomenal speakers, and they just suck at running a business. And so you have to recognize, like, again, if you're great on stage, but you don't really think through the business side of it, like you're not going to be in business that way. And so you really have to understand both sides of it.
So, was there a particular moment when you realized I need to start this? I need to not just make my career as a full-time speaker, but I need to go ahead and start this thing to help other people do that same thing.
Yeah, well, I'd say two things were happening. One was I got to a point where I was doing about as much speaking as I wanted to do or was capable of doing. So, one of the challenges with speaking, I remember a friend telling me early on, he said that speaking is a high-paying manual labor job in that we get paid really, really well to stand on stage and run our mouths. But the nature of it is you have to leave your home, you have to leave your family, you have to go to the airport, you have to fly somewhere typically. You have to spend a lot of time in hotels and airports and on airplanes and waiting. And you have to do that. And whenever, if I fly to Phoenix and I speak to a room of 100 people, I can only speak to that room of 100 people. My impact doesn't really extend beyond that in that moment. And so there's that side of it that you get paid really well to go speak in Phoenix, but you also have to leave your family to go to Phoenix for a minute. And so there's only so much you can do that. There's a limitation. There's a natural cap on that. And so I didn't necessarily want to be doing more gigs. And I also was on the upper end of what I felt comfortable charging in my market. But I just noticed a lot of people were asking me questions on a regular basis, like speaking peers and colleagues, as well as other people who, again, were where I was early on saying, I want to be a speaker. I just don't know what to do next. And so I knew that there's a lot of people we could help with that who again, were in my shoes when I got started, of knowing, like, we just got to give them the plan. We just got to give them the tools, and they can do this. They can help share their message with other people. They just need some know-how. And so that's what we've tried to create inside the Speaker Lab.
Which came first then, the Speaker Lab program or the Speaker Lab podcast?
Actually, we kind of launched them at the same time. And so I was doing a lot of speaking, and we started having more and more people asking about different trainings or anything that we could offer, any way that we could help them. So we created Booked and Paid to Speak as the training program. Basically, what happened is we we're kind of at a crossroads where I was still doing a lot of speaking. I actually had a different podcast prior to the Speaker Lab podcast, kind of a career podcast about called "How Did You Get Into That?" And so I was doing,
which is a fantastic name for a show.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. We did, I think, 145, 150 episodes of that, and so really enjoyed doing that. But then I had this speaker thing, that like the speaker training stuff, that started taking off. So we switched everything basically from my personal brand to the Speaker Lab, and when we did that, then we started the podcast at the same time. So you could say that the Speaker Lab podcast and the Speaker Lab company were kind of born at the same time.
That's one of those other things too, is as you talked about there, just shifting that branding as that became necessary. Just because you create something and start something doesn't mean it has to stay that way forever. Just like a talk you're giving, you're going to continue to revise it and improve it and even turn it in a different direction over time.
Yeah, you better do that just to stay relevant and to keep up to date with examples or case studies or that sort of thing. So I can think of I remember years ago one of the examples I used was something related to American Idol and the original judges of Randy, Paula, and Simon, if we all remember that far back. But if I use that example now, it's like, how many of you guys have seen American Idol lately? And with Randy, Paula, and Simon, people are like, wait, what? That was years ago, So you have to make sure that you keep your examples, your case studies, your analogies. You want to make sure that they're up to date and relevant with what's actually going on in the world. So think of it a good. Okay, let's take like the Netflix Blockbuster example of Blockbuster. Thought, well, why would anybody watch a video online? The DVDs are still the thing. People are going to go to a store and buy DVDs or rent DVDs, and eventually it's like, nah, that model went out of style and it doesn't work anymore. It's no longer effective. And so you have to stay relevant with what's actually happening. And in their case, they didn't. They stuck with this is what we've always done, and now they're no longer in business.
So, and for our younger listeners, DVDs are these silver little discs that used to contain an entire movie and extra content that worked when your internet went out.
It's true. This is true.
So you put out a ton of value in the Speaker Lab podcast, but you also have the paid course. You also have the upcoming book. I mean, how do you balance offering all this content for free versus all of the content that you want to charge for? Or could somebody who just takes really good notes of all 250 episodes of the Speaker Lab ultimately build the course from that?
Sure, have at it. Yeah. So to your point, like, yes, we do put out a lot of free content in the form of the podcast, in the form of YouTube videos, some of the different training resources that we have. And so yeah, there are days where I'm like, man, we are giving away a lot of stuff for free here. Um, but here's what we have found. We have found that sure, you could absolutely go through the entire archive of the podcast. You can go through every free thing that we have there, and you can take it and you can absolutely implement it and see results as a speaker. So we do a regular free webinar training. And we walk through, here's exactly what you need to know to be able to find and book gigs. And we tell people at the end, like, if you can take everything we've shown you and you can go get results. Now, the reality is there's a lot of stuff we haven't covered and we haven't talked about and we haven't gone into, or you don't know which order to do things. And so that's where the value of a training program or training course can really come into play. Now, in addition to that, we have a different program called our Books and Paid to Speak Elite program, which is a lot more of a group and one-on-one coaching program. And so again, the content of what we put out there, a lot of that content may be in there of walking through what to do. The difference is you're going to have people that are going to walk through it with you, who are there to like help coach and train you. One of the expressions I've heard before is that it's hard to read the label from inside the jar.
Yeah.
It's hard to read the label from inside the jar, meaning that, okay, I understand this concept that as a speaker, I need to get really clear on who I speak to and what I speak about, what's the problem that I solve for them. And I can understand how this would apply to all these different examples or case studies. I'm having a hard time figuring out how it applies to me or what the correct answer is for me. So this is where having like coaches and people that are in the trenches with you can really help. I can give you a whole episode on figuring out who to speak to, what to speak about. And there's a whole section on the book about that as well. But you may have some trouble thinking it through for yourself. And so if you do have that, if that's the case, then we have the resources and support able to help you process that and help you continue to move forward.
So yeah, I think that's a really interesting side too, is that you don't know, even as you listen to these things, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't have that. It's hard to actually understand exactly where you're at and what mistakes you make unless you can talk with somebody, unless you can work through that, unless you can work through those. You can list out those simple questions. What do you want to speak about? Who do you want to speak to? But it's very different from reading those bullet points or hearing them in a podcast versus somebody actually asking you and you having to be accountable for providing an answer to them.
Right. And then in addition, like there are so many different nuances and different questions where people want to know, okay, but how does this apply in this industry? Or how does this apply in my scenario? Or how does this apply in this situation? And so being able to synthesize that and show, here's what it looks like for you, not just generically, but for you, here's how this plays out. In addition to just like random questions. So there's a gal in one of our programs who asked the other day, hey, I have a book I want to start selling at events, and I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to get it to the event. Do I need to just put it in my suitcase and take the books with me? Do I need to ship it ahead? Do I get the client to buy it? Do I pay for the shipping? Do they pay for the shipping? How does that work? So just some of these, like, that's a random type of question, but it's a real question that people are wondering. And when they're thinking about like, what do I do in that situation? And who do I even go to ask? And so they know inside of our program, they're going to have people that can answer that question for them and tell them what they need to do.
So a lot of it then too becomes just the value of that network and the value of those connections among not only your instructors and the learners, but among the learners and speakers themselves.
No, absolutely. And so you want to surround yourself with other people where you can get that feedback, get that support, and get those answers to the questions that you have. So when they do feel stuck, they know where they can go and they know where they can get that help.
What are some of the biggest mistakes you see newer speakers making?
On stage or in the business?
Both, really.
So I would say on the business side, going back to that part of getting clear on who you speak to and what's the problem that you solve, I think newer speakers have a big challenge with getting really really clear on the answers to those things. So oftentimes we just enjoy speaking, and so we think, well, I can speak to anybody about anything. And so who do you speak to? Well, I speak to humans. I speak to people. It's like, okay, well, that doesn't work. But what do what do you speak about? And they think, well, what do you want me to speak about? I can speak about anything. It's like, no, you can't. Like that's not accurate. So again, the more clear, the more narrow, the more focused you are, the easier it is to actually find gigs. But again, a lot of people just have a challenge with that because we think that we need to spread the net as far and wide as possible and speak to as many people as possible, which is just never effective. So I think I noticed that as a big challenge for newer speakers whenever they get up on stage. I think one thing that any speaker can do that's low hanging fruit is to spend more time practicing and preparing. Like again, we touched on this earlier, but the best speakers in the world don't just get up and wing it and just say some stuff and hope it all magically comes together. Like they've really spent some time thinking through the presentation, crafting it, practicing it, going over it. And that's something like you don't need any special skill set to do. You just need to be able to work at it. And so that's something that any new speaker could do, especially to become a better speaker.
It's amazing how it just so often comes back to those core fundamentals that make the difference.
Yeah, very much so. So, the things that make a speaker good are things where you're comfortable with your content, you're familiar with your content, you understand pausing, you understand telling a good story, you understand pacing, you understand keeping an audience engaged. Like again, it's simple things, but sometimes it does take some practice to get used to being able to do it in a really good way.
Yeah, absolutely. So for many of the folks who are coming into the speaker lab, I mean, do you often have to then help people work through speaking anxiety and speaking nerves, or is your typical audience, your typical collection of students sort of self-selecting in such a way that most of the people who are coming to the speaker lab are already comfortable with getting up on stage and talking to a large amount of people?
No, I think most people are still nervous about it, and I think that there's some confusion over that though, because when we talk about people being nervous, I think it's somewhat nerves, but I think it's also oftentimes we get confused with the body's reaction of excitement. So when the adrenaline's pumping, you're standing backstage, and you're just like, "Whoa, I'm really excited about this," and you feel kind of some of those butterflies. You think about like some of the big moments in life. When you propose to your spouse, or whenever a kid was born, or whenever you're interviewing for your dream job, like you probably feel some of those same nerves. And it's not this nervousness of like this is going to be a huge disaster, but it's this excitement, and that's the way that the body responds. And so whenever your body is responding that way before you go speak, one, that tells you that what you're doing matters, that what you're doing is significant, that it's important, because again, your body responded the same way in those big key pivotal moments in life. So just saying like, hey, what's happening right now? This is important. This is a big deal, which is good. That's what you want. So how do you minimize that? How do you deal with that? Well, one of the things that you could do is, again, going back to what we've touched on before here, which is to really spend the time practicing and preparing. So if you think about it, like whenever you were in, go back to like high school or college or university, and imagine you were taking some type of test or quiz. Before you would take that test, you have a choice. Like you can spend some hours studying, practicing, preparing it, going over the practice exams or study questions or reviewing your notes, or you can just kind of, I'm just going to show up and wing it, and it's probably not going to go well. Versus whenever you have done the work, you show up and you may still feel a little bit of nerves, but you show up feeling a lot more confident. Like, I got this. I'm ready. I've done the work. I'm ready for this moment. So the same thing is true for speakers. So how do you minimize nerves? I don't think they ever fully go away, because again, it's your reminder. It's your body's reminder to yourself that what you're doing matters, but you minimize it, you calm it to the point where it's not overwhelming, or it's not anxiety inducing, by just being prepared and being comfortable with the material versus, again, just hopping up there and hoping it all comes together.
I think that's really helpful for a lot of folks to then think about it too, in that context of when you're in that audience, when you're seeing that keynote speaker, you know what? They were nervous, and they were experiencing anxiety before they got on stage too. It's not that you're the only one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you, I'll put it this way, like the audience wants you to win. Like they are on your side. So nobody wants to see a bad speaker. So if I'm sitting in the audience, I am rooting for you to do well because I'm sitting there listening to you. So remember, it's not like this us versus them where they think that you're going to do a bad job. Like they want you to do good.
What is the new book about then?
Yeah, so the book is called The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, and Building Your Platform. So inside the book, we walk through a 5-step framework we called the Speaker Success Roadmap. The Speaker Success Roadmap, which is basically again, that 5-step process of exactly how do you find and book gigs. And so it makes the acronym SPEAK, SPEAK. And so high level, I'll give you the overview here. The S is for select a problem to solve. Select a problem to solve. And we've kind of touched on this, but this is again where you get really clear on who you speak to and what's the problem that you solve. The P is for then prepare your talk. Prepare your talk. And so we talk through, the differences between keynotes and workshops and seminars, and how do you put together a talk? How do you deliver a talk? Should you use slides? How do you deal with technology? How do you deal with audiences? How does the environment affect your talk? So we dig into that inside the P. The E is for establish yourself as the expert. And so this really comes down to your marketing materials, your website, your demo video, the things that you need to have in place, typically before people are willing to hire, and especially before they're willing to pay you to speak. The A is acquire paid speaking gigs. So this is where we get into some systems and processes of how do you actually find gigs, right? So I know I'm interested in speaking. I ultimately want gigs. What do I need to do to get started with that? And then the K is know when to scale. Know when to scale, meaning that a lot of people who are interested in speaking are also probably interested in doing a book or coaching or consulting or doing a course or a podcast or any number of other things. And so the truth is you can do all the things, but you can't do them all at once. So something's going to come first, something's going to come last. So you have to get really, really clear on what it is that you're trying to accomplish and how does speaking fit into the mix. So big picture, that's basically what the Speaker Success Roadmap is, that SPEAK framework, SPEAK. So that's what we dig into inside of the Successful Speaker.
So it's going to be a great tool for somebody who wants to start making that transition into a paid speaking part-time or full-time opportunity, side hustle, regular hustle, whatever, and more focused then on building that business and building that career versus versus how to use gestures and intonation and refine your talk.
Yeah. So again, for people who would say, I want to be a full-time speaker, it would be a good fit for them. And for people who would say, I don't necessarily want to be a full-time speaker, but I would love to speak, 2, 3, 4 times a year. The nice thing is, like, there's no right or wrong amount that you have to do. But if you're someone who is interested in speaking at all, whether you want to do a couple gigs or a whole bunch of gigs, then the book will give you the step-by-step process of exactly what you need to do.
I think that's a great example, too, of what you were talking about earlier with the importance of figuring out who you want to speak to, because you could write a public speaking book for anybody who has to speak in public. And that's pretty much everybody who has to talk at some point. But that doesn't really get you anywhere. When you start talking about, if you want to do this, this is the book for you. This is the tool for you.
Yeah, there's a bunch of books out there on kind of the art side of it. How do you put together and deliver a good talk? And again, that's something we cover inside the book, but there's not a lot out there on how do you actually find a gig and how do you know how much to charge and what do you speak about? And so that's what this book is going to be all about.
Fantastic. So why did you choose to write it now? I mean, what is it at the point in your business or the point in the culture where it makes sense to have this book out now in February 2020?
Yeah, so the book was actually, it's doing a traditionally published book is a long process. So we actually started the journey about 2.5 years ago from, the concept and the idea and first talking with a publisher to where we are now. So definitely it takes a minute. And so for us, we know that there's a lot of people interested in speaking, that having a traditionally published book that's in, bookstores everywhere brings a certain amount of credibility to the company and to what we're doing. And so, yeah, we wanted to be able to take everything that we know on the speaking business. Having worked with literally thousands of students over the past several years, we've figured out a lot more of what works and how to best teach this. And so, yeah, it's definitely a good time to put this out and to give people a step-by-step process of exactly what they need to do to make their speaking dreams a reality.
I think when you talk about having worked with thousands of students in the past, I think that's a really valuable thing too. That I think often we don't realize that you don't necessarily understand something as well as you think you do until you try to teach it, and then you start getting a lot better at teaching it in the future, because now you start to break down the process even more.
Yeah, no, 100%. Because whenever, even like early on, when I was still speaking a lot, and I was having people who were asking me, "Hey, I want to be a speaker. What do you do?" And I'm just kind of like, "I don't know. You just do stuff, and it works." It's like you know. But then when you step back and be like, "Okay, there is something here. There's something that's working. So now we got to synthesize it and figure out what it is, and what's the repeatable process that other people can apply and implement." And even like with, we've had a lot of students who have become successful enough that they've been able to quit their jobs, and they're full-time speakers now who are earning, significant income, some, several $100,000 from speaking. And so we want to try to look and identify, okay, what are they doing? And how did they followed our process, but what within the process were they doing that worked that we can identify with and teach others? So, so it's definitely like teaching people, what teaching people what you've learned and what works, definitely forces you to get better at teaching it.
And one of the things you mentioned was about it being a traditionally published book. I mean, how did you, in this day and age when we've got all these different changes, the traditional publishing, self-publishing, hybrid models, I mean, why did you choose to go the traditional model versus, say, self-publishing, which I believe you've done in the past?
Yeah, I did. So when I was doing a lot of speaking, I did a lot of speaking in the education space, working with high school students and colleges. And so I have two self-published books in the education space. So we've gone the self-publishing route, and there's a lot of things I really like about the self-publishing route. One of the big things that we were interested in with doing this was one, that the publisher had offered a significant advance, a six-figure advance that was hard to turn down. Two was just some of the distribution and connections that they have to get the book out, and it brings some to get the book out to bookstores, and just the distribution opportunities that they have that you could still get with self-publishing, but may be a little bit more difficult. And then I think the other part of it is, in this day and age where the bar to entry is very low for self-publishing, that's not a knock on it in any way. Like I said, I've self-published before. I think there's still amount of credibility that goes along with having a book that's traditionally published. And so especially like in our space, where there's certainly other people that teach, the speaking world and the speaking business, but people in this day and age still recognize the credibility and authority that comes with having a traditionally published book, that a publisher says, hey, you are the authority, you are the expert, you're a go-to person on this topic. And I think that carries a lot of weight with it for what it is that we do.
So what is next for the Speaker Lab team?
Well, big thing is just we're in book mode right now. So get the book into as many people's hands as possible, and hopefully they implement it and apply it. And again, we've got a couple different group coaching and one-on-one coaching programs, as well as just the course itself that just help people. There's a lot of people interested in speaking, and so I know we've got some. Hopefully, we've got some job security in that. Just being able to help people understand that the process they need to take, process they need to follow, and the steps that they need to take to share their message with the world. So we've got a great team of people located all over, primarily the U.S., but just an awesome team of people, and we love working with speakers, love helping speakers.
Fantastic. And I love how it's gone from you speaking in the education space to building out to this team that you have now.
Yeah, we've got a great team. I absolutely love our team. We're all deeply committed and loyal to one another, to the Speaker Lab, and to our students. And so we've got a good thing going right now. We're excited about it.
Fantastic. And in the question I stole straight off of the Speaker Lab podcast episodes, if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Yeah, so everything that we do lives at thespeakerlab.com, thespeakerlab.com. All the information on the book is there, thespeakerlab.com/book. We have several different, again, free trainings. We have a speaker fee calculator if you haven't messed with. Definitely check out. People ask, how much should I charge as a speaker? And the answer is, it depends, which is a bad answer. So to put together this free calculator, you can go to myspeakerfee.com, answer a couple questions, and I'll tell you what you should be charging as a speaker. So yeah, lots of free resources over there for speakers. Again, everything's over at thespeakerlab.com. And the book is The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps for Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, and Building Your Platform.
Awesome. And we're going to link to all of those over in the show notes as well. So, Grant, this has been absolutely fantastic. It's a thrill to chat with you, and congratulations on the book. This has been great.
Thanks, Bill. Really appreciate it, man.
I hope I didn't go fanboy too much in that episode. I'm a big fan of Grant's work, as I said, and it's a thrill to have him on the podcast. In other news, yes, I know it's been a while since I published an episode, so thanks for sticking with me. I mean, I really appreciate your time. Yes, yours. It's been several months since I had an episode, and that several months has really been filled with the work of buying my first home with my girlfriend, doing some more intense projects at work, some of the additional health stuff related to my stroke, and just a whole bunch of other things that have managed to fill up my days pretty well. And unfortunately, I didn't get to put out as many episodes as I wanted to. I did not want to rush them and try to sacrifice quality just to hit the calendar. So, as I said, I appreciate your patience. As we look forward, I do have more episodes planned and really already recorded and in the can, and you'll be hearing those in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, if your organization or the organization of someone you know is looking for a speaker for an event, well, let's talk. I speak about business and life lessons learned from my stroke recovery experience, and I'd love to see how we can work together. You can find me at bill@2minutetalktips.com. So now, go ahead and subscribe to the Speaker Lab podcast in your favorite podcast app to hear more from Grant and learn how you can grow your own speaking business. Be sure to check out Grant's new book, The Successful Speaker, 5 Steps to Booking Gigs, Getting Paid, and Building Your Platform. Share this episode with someone you know who might be interested in building a speaking career by giving them the link 2minutetalktips.com/Grant. And of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.